This is an overview of the Medicare CQMs application that we can access in the Tuva portal by going into this tab. So I'm going to click into the application. And the first thing we see is a high-level summary of where we stand. We see how many open care gaps we have across all Medicare CQMs. We see how many care gaps we have with upcoming appointments. We see the current score across all Medicare CQMs, and we see the score we would have if we closed care gaps with upcoming appointments. Here are the 5 performance year 2026 Medicare CQMs, and for each of these we see the current average score and how we're performing against the previous performance year. Here we have the total number of people in the denominator, the total number of exclusions, the total number of people in the performance denominator, which is just the denominator minus exclusions, and the total number of people in the numerator. In the measure scoreboard, we see the list of the 5 performance year 2026 Medicare CQMs. And for each of these, we see the current score and how we're performing against CMS benchmark target. We also see the number of people in the initial denominator, the exclusions, the number of people in the performance denominator, in the numerator, and the number of gaps for every measure. If we drill into the gaps tab, then we see how the gaps are distributed. So we see how many open gaps we have, how many gaps are reachable, meaning that we have an attributed provider or clinic for the patient, we have a valid contact information, or we have an upcoming appointment. We see how many gaps have upcoming appointments and how many can be closed in the relevant time window. This is a comprehensive list of all care gaps for all patients, all measures. So we see the patient name, the measure name, the status of the care gap, which is just one of these 4 categories, and evidence for why the patient is in that denominator, where we see the specific code and the date associated with the code that puts the patient there. We can search for a specific patient's name, and then we would only see care gaps associated with that patient. But if we don't search for any name, we see the comprehensive list of all care gaps. If we go to the Providers tab, we see a list of all practices, and we see how each practice is performing across all Medicare CQMs. Here's a list of all 5 performance year 2026 measures and how we're performing across all practices compared to benchmark. We can drill into a specific practice by clicking into it, and then we see the providers in that practice. And on the right-hand side here, we see how we're performing across all measures for that specific practice. We can still drill into a provider by clicking into a provider, and then we see the list of patients attributed to that provider. This shows us how we're performing across all these measures for that particular provider. And we can still drill into a specific patient by clicking into a patient, and this just shows us the evidence for why this patient is in any of the 5 performance year 2026 measures. There's evidence for being in the denominator, in the numerator, or in an exclusion. So we see the specific codes that put a patient there with the date associated with the codes. We can come back to the practice level or to the list of all practices. If we go to the simulator, this gives us a list of all the Medicare CQMs and the current score that we have for them. But we can simulate what would happen if we close a certain number of care gaps for that measure, how that changes the forecasted MIPS quality points for that measure, and how that changes a forecasted combined MCQM score for all measures. So we can play with simulating closing different numbers of events for each of the Medicare CQMs and seeing the overall impact on the scores. And if we go to the Evidence tab, here's a comprehensive list of all evidence for all measures. So if we want to search for a specific patient, we can search for a specific patient and see all evidence for this patient for all Medicare CQMs. So we can see all the codes that put the patient in the denominator, numerator, or exclusions for any of the measures. We can filter the entire app to look at a specific ACO. We can filter to look at a specific practice. And so this is the functionality of the app in a nutshell.